pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
My name's Sean. I'm the Book Maniac. Welcome to my new Booktube channel. This is my debut Deer in the Headlights video, and I hope you like how I decorated for this video. This is my throw the Keith Haring blanket over all the junk piled up behind me strategy, and with such awesome results. So without further ado, I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm a Canadian guy living and teaching in Tokyo, and that's all I'm going to say about personally. But more importantly, I thought I would introduce myself by giving a rundown of the top 10 books I've read in the first half of this year. Let's begin, and they'll be in chronological order. The first one that I want to talk about is a book that everybody's talking about on YouTube right now because it's on the Booker long list, Ali Smith's Autumn. I read it early this year, and I don't have much to add to the cogent insights that other booktubers have on this book. I absolutely loved it. It was my first. It's a book about the friendship between a young woman and a much older man who had been her next door neighbor. But it's about renewing your passport. It's about identity. It's about Brexit. It's about art. It's just brilliant. So you probably know Ali Smith is writing one novel for each season. The winter book is coming out in November. I can't wait. And I also want to read everything she's ever written. But this was just a delight. So, Ali Smith's Autumn. Loved it. I think I'll be very disappointed if it's not on the short list, and I wouldn't be surprised if it wins. The next one is a Canadian novel by a writer named Miriam Taves called All My Puny Sorrows. I did this book on audio only, and sometimes that's a little bit subpar, but when you have an audio narrator like this one, I don't remember her name, but I'll put it at the bottom here when I find it. That translates the text into that medium so powerfully, it just becomes a deep experience. Like, I listen to it so deeply. It's a really heavy story. It's about two very creative, talented sisters. The main character, or the narrator anyway, is a young adult novelist, and her sister's an extremely talented musician, but who has suffered all her life with clinical depression and is suicidal, makes several suicide attempts during the course of the story. That's all I'm going to say about the story. It is heavy, but it's also full of joy and creativity and laughter. And the characters are so deeply drawn that they're just so alive as you're reading the book. I think you'll see in several of my picks I'm attracted to heavy stories with a lot of pain and suffering that have some moments of almost incandescent levity, and this was definitely one. So that's All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taves. So moving right along to another really heavy novel. This is a 2017 debut, Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. I love this book so much, and it's also really heavy. I don't want to say too much about the plot, because it's the kind of story that you just need to experience. But I'll just set it up. As the novel opens with this middle-aged married couple living on a mountainside in, you guessed it, Idaho. And the man is maybe in his mid-50s, and he's suffering from a hereditary form of dementia that affected his father and his grandfather at around the same age. So he's losing his mind and losing his memory. And his wife, who's the narrator of the novel for the most part, is doing her best to take care of him, while he, the most gentle, loving man, is, because of his dementia. He's occasionally becoming violent. So it's a harrowing situation. The man had suffered an unspeakable family tragedy in his first marriage, and it takes most of the novel for the reader to find out exactly what happened, and it is wrenching, and for some readers it's too much, but wow, it's told with such humanity, and the writing is just astounding. I will read anything Emily Ruskovich ever writes. This novel just ripped my heart out. Now for a complete change of pace, I don't read much comedy. I'm not usually interested in literature that makes me laugh, but Thomas of the podcast The Readers has recommended this Map and Lucia by E.F. Benson, a 1935 novel, and oh my god, this was just a delight. In my image, this is Lucia and this is Map. Lucia is a young widow in a British town, and she decides one summer to pick up and move to a neighboring town for the summer, just for something to do. And she's she's a ball of fire, so she completely takes over the social life of the town, and that doesn't sit well with Map, who had been the doyen of the village. So this incredible rivalry takes place between these two. It's hilarious, it's vindictive, it's a rollicking, crazy story that's written with such intelligence. But there's something deep about the humor here, and about the way that he describes their machinations, and also describes the society that they're fighting for control of, that just made me think really deeply about things like nicknaming. This was a charming, charming, lovely book. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Map and Lucia by E.F. Benson. Next, I read a classic novel that I had decided long ago I didn't want to read. It sounded kind of boring and maybe difficult because it would have a lot of African-American colloquial diction, which isn't always easy to read on the page. And I just didn't want to. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and I was captivated from about page 2. The writing just sings. It's not a musty old book. It is alive and vibrant. I just fell into it and didn't want to come back out. The diction was no problem to read, but her expository writing, it's just like water. It flows so beautifully. I love this book so much, it's now my favorite American novel. I can't wait to read everything else Zora Neale Hurston has ever written, because she is amazing. Next, another 2017 debut, Sympathy by Olivia Sujit. She's a British writer, and this is a story about an internet obsession. The protagonist is a young British woman, an adoptee, doesn't get on with her adoptive mother so well, is got a lot of the typical issues of an adoptee. I'm an adoptee, so resonated on that level. She starts corresponding with her elderly paternal grandmother who lives in New York City, and the grandmother, even though she's dying, convinces the woman to come and stay with her in New York City, and this young woman starts following a Japanese writer, a female living in New York, following her on her blog and on Facebook or every kind of social media, and finds a way to finagle herself into this Japanese woman's life, and it's a story of that obsession. And it's such a young story. It's so young and trendy, and social media Instagram, blah, blah, blah. I thought, this is not going to be for me. Oh my God, I couldn't put this book down. It's so wonderfully written. It's an extremely literary novel. I loved it so much. But there is one small thing that I hated, so I have to say that. Sujit made her young British protagonist mixed biracial. Half black. I think the father, the biological father, was black. But she doesn't deal with it at all. In fact, I missed it until I got almost 3/4 of the way through, and I go, what? And I had to go way back to the beginning, and there's this couple little sentences. It's like, so that pisses me off, I have to say. This young woman with all of her issues and growing up in a white British family and then going to stay with her white grandmother in New York and walking the streets of New York and making friends there, that nobody ever says anything about her appearance or her racial identity. Like, maybe she's light-skinned, but nobody ever says anything, and she never has any interior monologue, all the things that she's exploring. So take that rant about 2% of my feelings about this story, and I loved it so much. So with that caveat, Sympathy. Two more. This is a Canadian classic from 1959, Swamp Angel by Ethel Wilson. Wow, is this ever good? Again, this is not some dusty old book. This book read so beautifully to me. It's such a the writing is so wonderful. It's about a woman who in Vancouver who leaves an unhappy marriage, and she ends up going into northern British Columbia and working at a kind of fishing resort. What captivated me deeply about this story is another of the characters. So let me just set it up very quickly. The night that the main character leaves her husband, first place he goes to look for her after she's left is the neighbors down the street. And that's Nell Severance is the old lady and her daughter, to see if they know anything, and they don't. But old Nell Severance, she's 80 years old or something, she and her husband, who's dead, had been circus performers. So they had this wild, crazy life, and her act in the circus was she juggled revolvers. And she still carries her pearl-handled revolver on her everywhere she goes. So this jerk of a husband stomps into her living room and is kind of being aggressive, and he's angry, which is fine, but he's being kind of a macho shithead, and she just picks up her pearl-handled revolver and starts juggling it in the air while he's talking, and he just shuts up and looks at her, and he totally calms down, and she takes control. And she is just this most dynamic, alive character, and what the hell is she doing in the middle of 1950s Canadian literature? I love her! And the name of her revolver is Swamp Angel, so it's like this huge symbol or image of gender nonconformity in 1950s Canadian literature. Canadian literature hadn't really been invented yet, and here was this Nell Severance with her revolver. So I love this so much, and please check it out. My last one is the one I've read most recently. I think I finished it in July, but it's also my most favorite. And I haven't been able to find anything on Booktube about this novel, so maybe this is this novel's Booktube debut. A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Mara. This is one of the best books I've ever read. I would say it's number 2. The best book I have ever read is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. And this is definitely number 2. And one of the reasons I wanted to start a booktube channel is to develop my ability to talk about books that I love this deeply, because it's really hard for me. So I'm going to be even more tongue-tied for this segment than I have for the previous 9. This is a story that opens with a young girl in a Chechnyan village in the middle of the Chechnyan wars. Her father has been taken by the Russian secret police, or whatever they are, in the night, which probably means everybody is worried that means he's gone to the death camp and they'll never see him again. And it's also apparent that they had wanted to take the girl, but she had somehow evaded them. So she's about 11 years old or something, and their next door neighbor, Ahmed, takes her and walks with her several kilometers away to a shelled out hospital that's still more or less open, where the only doctor is a ethnic Russian doctor, a woman who is doing her best to keep providing medical services for the grievously wounded during the conflict. And Ahmed begs her to hide this girl at the hospital, and she very reluctantly does, and so that's the beginning of the story. Sounds pretty heavy, hey? Well, it is heavy. It's there's a lot of incredible amount of violence in the story, but this is just a remarkable novel. She starts with that story and it just butterflies out into hundreds of years of Chechnyan history, and it's a incredible story of war and peace and family and disappearance and love and sex and adultery and language and storytelling. How did he do this? He's not Chechnyan. He'd never been to Chechnya, and it just rings true at the deepest level. And here's maybe the most remarkable thing, and then I'm going to shut up. There is so much humor in this book. Like you're wanting to cry your eyes out, and then you turn the page and you're peeing your pants laughing. It's really, really a work of beauty. So, Booktube, I would just be delighted if more people started reading and discussing this, because this blew me away. That's all I got for now. Thank you very much.